My father looked my boyfriend straight in the eye and said the words that would destroy everything. "Vanessa's too fragile for military life. Bridget's the one you need. She's stronger, better for a soldier's wife." And Jake, the man I'd loved for 3 years, nodded. 3 weeks later, I stood in the back of their wedding while my sister wore my engagement ring. I didn't cry or scream. I just smiled. And that smile, it was the last thing they ever saw coming. Before I tell you how I made them pay for what they took from me, let me know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below. Because what happened next changed everything, not just for me, but for my entire family. And if this story hits home, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You're going to want to hear how this ends. But first, I would like you to grab a cup of coffee as we ride together into this story. I should probably tell you who I was before my life split into before and after. My name is Vanessa, and I grew up in a house where love was always conditional. My father, Harold, ran our family like a drill sergeant even though he'd never served a day in his life. He worked construction, believed in hard work and harder women, and made it clear from the time I could walk that I wasn't quite what he'd hoped for. My sister Bridget was 2 years older and built like she could carry the world on her shoulders. Broad, athletic, the kind of woman who could change a tire in heels and still look unbothered. I was smaller and quieter, the kind of person who got lost in books and spent too much time in my own head. Dad called her his rock. He called me fragile. Growing up, every achievement was measured against her. When I got straight A's, he'd mention Bridget's basketball scholarship. When I got into college for journalism, he'd talk about how Bridget could lift more than most men at the gym. It wasn't that he hated me. He just never saw me as enough. Then I met Jake. I was 22, working part-time at a coffee shop near the base while finishing my degree. He walked one October morning in his uniform, all clean lines and quiet confidence. When he ordered, his voice was steady but kind. When he smiled at my terrible joke about his extra shot of espresso, I felt something shift in my chest. We started slow. Coffee dates turned into long drives. Long drives turned into late-night conversations where he told me about his deployment to Germany, about the weight of responsibility, and how he wanted a life that felt real when he came home. I told him about my family, about feeling invisible and wanting to write stories that mattered. He looked at me like I already did. 3 years later, we were planning a future. He'd been promoted to sergeant. I'd gotten a job at a local newspaper. We talked about a small wedding, maybe in the spring, somewhere quiet with just the people who mattered. Then he asked to meet my family properly. I should have known better. I should have kept him away. But I wanted my father to see me the way Jake did. I wanted him to witness that someone thought I was worth choosing. The dinner was at my parents' house on a Saturday night in late November. My mother, Lorraine, made pot roast. Bridget showed up late, fresh from the gym, her hair still damp, her presence filling the room the way it always did. My father sat at the head of the table, watching Jake with the kind of interest he usually reserved for contractors he was vetting for jobs. At first, everything seemed fine. Jake was polite, respectful, and asked the right questions. My father nodded along, arms crossed, measuring every word. Then, halfway through dinner, my father leaned back and said, "So you're a career military?" "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Planning to make it to 20 years, maybe more." "That's a hard life," my father said, his eyes flicking to me for just a second. "Not everyone can handle it." Jake smiled. "Vanessa's stronger than she looks." I felt my chest warm. My father's face stayed neutral. "Strength isn't just about handling things," my father said slowly. "It's about thriving under pressure. Military spouses need to be able to stand on their own, move bases, manage households alone, deal with deployments without falling apart." "I know," Jake said. "Vanessa and I've talked about all of that." Bridget laughed, a low sound that cut through the room. "No offense, Ness, but you cried when you had to put your cat down for 3 days straight." My mother shot her a look, but my father chuckled. "She's got a point." I felt my throat tighten. Jake's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, but I could see it. The seed and the doubt. It had been planted. After dinner, my father pulled Jake aside. I watched from the kitchen while my mother washed dishes and Bridget scrolled through her phone at the table. They stood in the hallway, voices low, my father's hand on Jake's shoulder like they were old friends. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught pieces. "She's a good girl, but Bridget's been through a lot, tougher than most men I know. You need someone who won't break when things get hard." When Jake came back, his face was unreadable. We left soon after. On the drive home, I asked him what my father had said. Nothing important, Jake said, but his voice was different. I should have pushed. I should have demanded the truth. But I was so used to swallowing my feelings, to making myself small, that I just nodded and stared out the window. 2 weeks later, Jake started acting strange. He'd cancel plans last minute. His texts got shorter. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd say he was just stressed about work. I believed him because I wanted to. Then one night in early December, he called me. "We need to talk," he said, and I felt my stomach drop. We met at a park near his apartment. It was cold, the kind of cold that bites through jackets and settles into your bones. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, his hands shoved into his pockets. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said when I sat down. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I love you," he said, and I exhaled, thinking maybe this was just cold feet or nerves. "But I don't think we're right for each other." The world tilted. "What?" I said. "Jake, where is this coming from?" He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, pity. "You're amazing, Vanessa. But I need someone who can handle the life I'm asking them to live. Someone stronger." "Stronger," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "I'm sorry," he said. I think you'd be happier with someone else. Someone who doesn't have to leave all the time." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask if my father had gotten to him. But instead, I just stood up, my legs shaking, and walked away. He didn't follow. 3 weeks later, Bridget called me. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice careful. "What?" Jake reached out to me. I went cold. He wanted advice about deployment stuff. We got to talking. Ness, I didn't mean for it to happen, but what? "We're seeing each other." The phone slipped from my hand. I stood in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to process what she'd just said. My sister, my boyfriend. My father's words echoing in my head. She's stronger. 2 months later, Jake proposed to Bridget. My father called to tell me, his voice full of pride. "She's perfect for him, Vanessa. You'll see, this is what's best for everyone." I hung up without saying a word. The wedding was planned for late January, small, just family. When the invitation arrived in the mail, I stared at it for hours. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me wanted to burn it. But a larger part, the part that had spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval, wanted to show them I was fine, that I was strong enough to handle it. So I went. The wedding was held at a small venue near the base, the kind of place with exposed brick and string lights. I wore a simple black dress and sat in the back row, my hands folded in my lap, my face a mask of calm. My mother kept glancing at me from the front, her expression pained. But my father, he looked proud and relieved, like he'd fixed a problem. Bridget walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, her hair pinned back, her face glowing. Jake stood at the altar in his dress uniform, looking every bit the man I'd loved. When they exchanged vows, I felt something inside me crack, not break, crack, like ice forming over a frozen lake. At the reception, my father gave a toast. He talked about strength, about finding the right person, about how proud he was of Bridget for stepping up. He didn't mention me once, not even to acknowledge that I was there. I left early. No one noticed. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I threw myself into work, taking on extra assignments, staying late at the office. I stopped answering my mother's calls. I blocked Bridget's number and told myself I was moving on. But late at night, when the apartment was too quiet, I'd lie awake replaying every moment. Every word my father had said. Every look Jake had given me. The way Bridget had smiled at the altar like she'd won something. And slowly, quietly, something inside me shifted. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. No, not angry. Furious. Not the hot, explosive kind of fury that burns itself out. The cold, patient kind that waits and plans. One night, about a month after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I started writing down everything I knew, every detail, every conversation and every moment that led to this. My father had convinced Jake I wasn't strong enough. He'd pushed Bridget toward him. He'd orchestrated the whole thing because he didn't think I was good enough. But here's what my father didn't know. I was a journalist. My job was finding the truth, digging into stories no one wanted told. And I was very, very good at it. I started small. I called an old friend from college who now worked in HR at the base. Over coffee, I casually mentioned Jake's name, said I was doing a story on military families. She didn't think twice about pulling up his file. That's when I learned something interesting. Jake had lied about his promotion. He wasn't a sergeant. He'd been passed over twice. His record showed multiple infractions for conduct, including a formal complaint from a female officer he'd been involved with before me. The complaint had been dropped, but it was there, buried and waiting. I kept digging. Through another contact, I found out Bridget had been fired from her last job for falsifying her time card. She'd told the family she quit, but the truth was uglier. She'd also racked up significant credit card debt, the kind that comes from living beyond your means and expecting someone else to fix it. And my father, Harold, the man who prided himself on honesty and hard work, had been skimming from his construction company for years. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger an audit, but enough to pad his retirement account. His partner had noticed discrepancies but hadn't confronted him yet. I sat back, staring at my notes, feeling something dark and satisfying settle into my chest. They thought I was fragile. They thought I'd break. They had no idea what I was capable of, but I haven't moved yet. I waited and I watched. I let them settle into their new life, let them believe they'd gotten away with it. Jake and Bridget moved into a small house near the base. My father helped with the down payment, crowing about how he was setting them up for success. My mother tried to reach out to me, but I kept my distance. Polite, but cold. 3 months after the wedding, I got a promotion at the newspaper, senior investigative journalist. My editor loved my work and said I had a nose for stories that mattered. I smiled and thanked her, but in my head, I was already planning. I started attending family dinners again, just once a month, enough to stay present. I was pleasant, asked questions, and laughed at my father's jokes. They thought I'd moved on. They thought I'd forgiven them. They were wrong. The plan came together on a rainy Tuesday night in April. I was at my desk, staring at the wall of notes I'd collected over the past 3 months when it hit me. I didn't need to destroy them all at once. I needed to let them destroy themselves. Here's what I knew. Jake's career was barely hanging on. One more complaint, one more incident, and he'd be facing discharge. Bridget's financial situation was a disaster. She'd opened 3 new credit cards since the wedding, all maxed out. She was hiding it from Jake, but barely. My father's skimming would come to light eventually. His partner, a man named Frank, was meticulous. It was only a matter of time before he demanded a full audit. All I had to do was nudge the dominoes. I started with Bridget. I created a fake email account and sent her information about a financial wellness seminar at the base. Free, for military spouses, designed to help manage debt. I knew she'd ignore it, but I also knew Jake checked her email when she wasn't looking. He was controlling like that. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I heard through my mother that Jake and Bridget had a massive fight. He'd found out about the debt. She'd lied, said it was from before the wedding, but he wasn't buying it. The cracks were starting to show. Next, I focused on Jake. I reached out to the officer who'd filed the complaint against him. Her name was Officer Pratt, and she'd left the military shortly after the incident. I told her I was writing a story on misconduct in the armed forces and asked if she'd be willing to share her experience anonymously. She agreed. In her interview, she described a pattern of behavior. Jake had pressured her into a relationship, then turned vindictive when she ended it. Spread rumors, made her work life hell until she finally filed the complaint. When it was dropped, she left rather than fight a system that didn't believe her. I didn't publish the story, not yet, but I sent a copy to Jake's commanding officer with a note. Thought you'd want to know this before it goes to print. 3 days later, Jake was called in for a formal review. Finally, I turned to my father. This one required patience. I couldn't be the one to expose him. It had to come from inside. So I waited until Frank mentioned the discrepancies at a family dinner. My father brushed it off, saying it was probably just accounting errors. I pulled Frank aside later and casually mentioned that I'd done a piece on embezzlement in small businesses. It always starts small, I said, but the longer it goes, the worse it gets. You should probably look into it before it becomes a legal issue. Frank's face went pale. He thanked me and said he'd look into it. 2 weeks later, my father was confronted. Frank had hired a forensic accountant. The numbers didn't lie. Harold had taken over $40,000 over the past 5 years. Frank offered him a choice: pay it back and resign quietly or face criminal charges. My father chose to pay. But here's the thing about men like my father. They can't stand to lose, especially when they don't understand how they lost. He started spiraling, snapping at my mother and drinking more, blaming everyone but himself. And when things with Jake and Bridget started falling apart, he tried to hold it together, tried to be the strong patriarch who fixes everything. But he couldn't. Because the foundation he'd built his pride on was rotten. I watched it all from a distance, my face calm, my heart cold. And then in late June, everything came to a head. The call came from my mother on a Saturday morning. "Vanessa," she said, her voice shaking. "Can you come over? It's your father." I drove to their house slowly, my hands steady on the wheel. When I arrived, the driveway was full. Bridget's car, Jake's truck, and even my aunt's van. Inside, the living room was tense. My father sat in his chair, his face red, his jaw tight. Bridget was crying on the couch. Jake stood by the window, his arms crossed and his expression blank. My mother met me at the door, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered. "He needs you." I stepped inside. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice calm. "Everything's falling apart," my father said, his voice raw. "Frank's taking the company, Jake's being reviewed for discharge, Bridget's drowning in debt. And no one will tell me how it all went so wrong so fast." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd spent my entire life telling me I wasn't enough. This man who'd handed my future to my sister because he didn't think I could handle it. "Maybe," I said slowly, "it's because you built everything on lies." The room went silent. "What are you talking about?" my father snapped. "You lied to Jake about me," I said, my voice steady. "You told him I was too weak. You convinced him Bridget was better, but you didn't stop to think about who Bridget really was, or who Jake really was. You just wanted to fix what you thought was broken." "Vanessa," my mother started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not done." I turned to Bridget. "You knew what you were doing when you went after Jake. You knew it would hurt me. But you did it anyway because Dad made you believe you deserved it more." Bridget sobbed harder, but I felt nothing. I looked at Jake. "And you let him convince you I wasn't strong enough. You didn't even fight for me. You just moved on to the easier option." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Finally, I looked back at my father. "You wanted me to break. You wanted me to prove you right, but I didn't. I got stronger and smarter. And I've spent the last 6 months watching you all destroy yourselves." "You," my father said, his voice shaking. "You did this." I smiled, the same smile from the wedding, the same smile that had followed me through every sleepless night. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped holding you up." And with that, I turned and walked out. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was brutal. Jake was dishonorably discharged after the review uncovered more complaints. Bridget filed for divorce 3 months later, drowning in debt and alone. My father's company dissolved. Frank walked away with everything, leaving Harold to figure out how to rebuild from nothing. My mother called me once, asking if I could forgive them. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not today." I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their approval. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need them at all. I moved to a new city, took a job at a bigger paper, and started writing the stories I'd always wanted to tell. I met people who saw me for who I was, not what I lacked. And slowly, carefully, I built a life that was entirely mine. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that dinner, about the moment my father looked at Jake and said I wasn't strong enough. He was wrong. I was stronger than all of them combined. I just needed them to get out of my way to prove it. If this story hit you the way it hit me, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from family to save yourself? Share your story below. And if you believe that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own choices, hit that subscribe button. Because justice doesn't always come with a judge. Sometimes it just comes with time, patience, and knowing when to let go. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.